Welcome back, Darklings. You've walked through churches, admired the angels, the saints, the cross glowing in stained glass. But have you ever looked a little closer? Nestled in the stonework, hidden in the wood above pews, there's a different kind of face watching you. Not Christ, not a saint, but a man made of leaves. His eyes stare wide, his mouth spills vines, and once you notice him, you'll see him everywhere. Carved high into beams, crouched above altar arches, even grinning from the corners of ancient stone walls. He doesn't belong, not really, but he's there. So, who is this leafy stranger hiding in God's house? Today, we're diving into one of the strangest mysteries hiding in plain sight. The Green Man. These strange, foliate faces began showing up in churches sometime around the 11th century. Sometimes they're fierce and wild in Romanesque stone, other times grimacing and ghoulish in Gothic carvings. But the core image is always the same, a human face intertwined with leaves, with greenery sprouting from its mouth, eyes, or nostrils. By the 12th to 14th centuries, they're everywhere, high up in ceiling vaults, peeking from behind choir stalls, wedged between holy figures and angels. But here's the strangest part. No one ever mentioned them. There's no record in the church's writings, no sermon notes, no explanation. These leafy faces just appeared, watching, silent. And they stayed that way, unspoken and unnamed, for hundreds of years. It wasn't until 1939 that someone finally gave this figure a name. A British woman named Julia Raglan looked up, saw that haunting face tangled in leaves, and recognized something ancient. In her now famous article for the journal Folklore, she called him the Green Man, and with that name, she sparked a mystery that's still unfolding today. Raglan believed this face wasn't Christian at all, but a lingering memory of a pagan god, a spirit of nature, fertility, and seasonal rebirth. She built her theory off the work of anthropologist Sir James Frazer, who traced the recurring theme of dying and rising vegetation gods across ancient mythologies. Raglan suggested that the Green Man was one of them, an old god who somehow slipped into Christian churches through the hands of anonymous stonemasons. She pointed to folk traditions that were still alive across the British Isles, spring festivals like May Day, garlanding, and the celebration of Jack in the Green. In these celebrations, men dressed in leaves and flowers parade through towns, honored as symbols of spring's return and nature's vitality. Raglan saw the Green Man not just in carvings, but in these leafy characters too. And when you witness it, when you see a towering figure covered head to toe in greenery, crowned with flowers, leading a parade of drummers and dancers, it's easy to believe there's something deeper going on, that this isn't just pageantry, that it's remembering something old, very old. Take Hastings, for example. Every May Day, crowds fill the streets as a massive Jack in the Green leads a boisterous procession. He's followed by dancers, musicians, and masked figures. There's drinking, maple dancing, laughter, and at the end, Jack is brought to a hilltop and stripped of his leaves, a ritual meant to release the spirit of summer. In Castleton, Derbyshire, they have the Garland King. He rides on horseback, cloaked in a bell-shaped frame of flowers and leaves. The whole village gathers to watch him pass solemnly by with a lady at his side. At day's end, the garland is hoisted high up the church tower. Then there's the Beltane Fire Festival in Edinburgh, held each spring on Carlton Hill. It's a ritualistic spectacle of fire and rebirth. The Green Man, his body painted emerald and head crowned in leaves, dances with the May Queen through firelight. The ceremony ends in symbolic death and resurrection, echoing ancient mythic cycles. All across Britain, every spring, green-clad figures come to life. They dance, they're celebrated, and then they die, only to be reborn again. Raglan believed these traditions were all modern echoes of the Green Man, that the figure carved in churches and the leafy parade icons were the same being,
a symbol of wild nature, the eternal cycle of life, death, and rebirth. But there's a catch, a big one. The earliest written record of Jack in the Green doesn't show up until 1770, over 600 years after the Green Man started appearing in churches. A Frenchman visiting London described a strange May Day event where a man entirely covered in greenery led a crowd through the streets. Before that, silence. When Samuel Pepys wrote about a London May Day parade in 1667, he mentioned milkmaids with garlands, but no leafy man, no Jack, no Green Man. So while the seasonal festivals themselves might be ancient, the figures Raglan pointed to, the leafy ones, don't seem to show up until much later. Some historians argued they were Victorian inventions, born from a romanticized obsession with the old ways. And while the tradition feels timeless, the documented trail just isn't there. But that raises a bigger question. Just because it wasn't written down, does that mean it didn't exist? Most folk traditions weren't documented, not by the church, not by the elite. These customs belonged to ordinary people, passed down orally, generation to generation, and they didn't always leave a paper trail. So, maybe Raglan was wrong about the direct connection, or maybe she was right, but the evidence has simply vanished with time. Either way, the origin of the Green Man remains open, unresolved. And if he didn't come from Jack in the Green, and if no Christian writing explains his presence, then we're left with something even deeper. Where did he come from? Because the Green Man doesn't just live in medieval England. He appears in places far older and far stranger. In France, a 4th century tomb shows a man with leaves bursting from his mouth. In Germany, Roman sarcophagi are adorned with foliated faces, human visages wrapped in vine and branch. In Hatra, the ruined city in modern Iraq, a 2nd century carving shows a face, its mouth overflowing with leaves. These leafy figures turn up in Roman villas, ancient temples, scattered across Europe and the Near East. Long before medieval churches were built, long before anyone called him the Green Man. And again, no one explained why. No inscriptions, no accompanying text, no doctrine. He was just there, watching. Perhaps once everyone knew what he meant. Perhaps his meaning was so obvious, no one felt the need to say it. Or maybe, just maybe, he was already a relic, already forgotten, even when his face was first carved. And that's where things start to spiral outward. Because once the mystery took root in the 20th century, people began offering their own theories, symbolic, mythical, spiritual, and even secretive.
So, where do we go from here? Well, after Lady Raglan's article, more theories started to bloom, just like the vines in the Green Man's face. Each one tried to explain who he was, what he meant, and why he ended up staring down at churchgoers for centuries without a word. Some researchers turned to mythology, and once you open that door, the Green Man starts to look less like a single figure and more like a 1,000-year echo of dozens of ancient deities. You've got the Celtic god Cernunnos, often depicted with antlers, surrounded by forest animals, deeply tied to fertility, the wilderness, and even the underworld. Sound familiar? Then there's Oceanus, a Roman sea god with seaweed for hair, often emerging from aquatic foliage. Dionysus, the Greek god of wine and madness, is another one. He's frequently shown crowned in ivy, draped in vines, surrounded by a chaotic, ecstatic energy. Even Osiris, the Egyptian god of resurrection and the afterlife, was depicted with green skin, the literal color of vegetation and rebirth. So, the idea starts to form. Could the Green Man be a Christian-era mask for these older gods of life, death, and renewal? Not erased, but repurposed, absorbed into the new religious system, given a quieter role in the shadows of church arches. It wouldn't be the first time. Across Europe, the early Christian church adopted and rebranded countless pagan traditions and symbols, transforming them into something new but familiar enough not to shock the locals. Christmas trees, Easter eggs, even the date of Christmas itself, none of it is biblical. It's adapted. It's syncretic. So maybe the Green Man is just one more example, a whisper of the old world, living on in stone, recontextualized for a new faith. But here's where it gets even stranger. Not every Green Man looks benevolent or wise. Some of them are grotesque, their mouths twisted in pain, their eyes wide with something more than serenity. Their vines aren't gentle, they're crawling, choking, aggressive. And that brings us to another ancient figure that haunted the medieval imagination, the wild man. Hairy, ragged, untamed, the wild man shows up in myths, manuscripts, and carvings all over Europe. He isn't evil exactly, but he isn't civilized either. He lives outside the boundaries of society, in the woods, far from law and church. He's primal, free, dangerous. In medieval art, he's often naked and bearded, club in hand, crouched among beasts or battling knights. He's the chaos that civilization fears, but secretly respects. And in some churches, this is key, you'll find both the Green Man and the Wild Man side by side, carved within feet of each other. Same pose, same placement. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe these two are masks of the same forgotten archetype. Nature's face, both beautiful and brutal. Life in its full wildness. And this idea of the wildness holding wisdom goes deeper than just art. We see it in ancient stories all over the world. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest known stories in human history, there's Enkidu, a wild man created by the gods. He lives with the animals, he drinks from rivers, he's free. But when he's brought into society, washed and clothed, he becomes human and wise. Only then can he speak, love, and learn. In the book of Daniel, King Nebuchadnezzar is cursed by God. He loses his mind, grows his hair like eagle feathers, his nails like claws. He lives like a beast in the field, driven out of human company, until he humbles himself and gains clarity. Even Merlin, before he became the wise wizard we know from Arthurian legend, was once a wild man. In the oldest Welsh stories, he flees into the woods, broken by battle, living like an animal. There, in madness and solitude, he receives the gift of prophecy. So the pattern emerges again and again. Wildness before wisdom. Chaos before clarity. The wild man, like the Green Man, holds secrets, but you have to tame him, or at least sit with him, to understand. Maybe that's why his face is in our churches. Not to scare us, not to honor him, but to remind us of the truth buried just beneath her tidy rituals. That wildness, nature, death, these aren't outside of the sacred. They're part of it. But not everyone sees symbolism or myth. Some historians have suggested something more practical. Maybe the Green Man is just decorative. A flourish, a bit of visual flair passed down from mason to mason, a popular pattern, nothing more. But in medieval times, stonemasons weren't just workers. They were members of powerful guilds, groups that were highly trained, deeply respected, and famously secretive. They knew sacred geometry. They embedded meaning in architecture. They left behind cryptic marks to identify their work. And some believe that the Green Man was one of those symbols. A kind of code. Not a secret everyone knew, but a signature, a reference, a preserved sliver of ancient knowledge passed from one generation of builders to the next. There's no hard evidence, no smoking gun scroll, but the fact that no record at all explains the Green Man might be the biggest clue of all. In a culture that recorded everything about saints and scripture, the silence is suspicious. Maybe he was never meant to be explained. Some even think he served a protective function,
like gargoyles on a roof, like the evil eye pendants in homes today. Maybe he was meant to scare away bad spirits, to keep nature close, but contained. Or maybe he was nature's eyes, watching the sacred space from the edges, reminding worshippers, I'm still here. And here's a twist you probably didn't see coming. The Green Man doesn't just appear in Europe. Travel east, into the temples of India, Indonesia, and Nepal, and you'll find a figure called Kirtimukha, sometimes called the Face of Glory. He's fierce, fanged, surrounded by leaves and floral patterns. His mouth spews vegetation and life force. He's placed above temple doorways to protect sacred spaces. Sound familiar? The resemblance is eerie, and some scholars believe it's not coincidence, that these images may have traveled along ancient trade routes through manuscripts or even returning crusaders. Stonemasons, hungry for inspiration, might have copied them without ever knowing their full meaning. And if that's true, then the Green Man might not be European at all. He might be global, a universal archetype, the face of nature itself.
But the Green Man's journey doesn't stop at temples and tombs. He reappears in one of the most unexpected corners of human history: alchemy. In the Renaissance, alchemy was more than turning lead into gold. It was spiritual science, a symbolic process. Alchemists believed that transformation wasn't just physical, it was personal. Just as nature renews itself every spring, a soul too could be renewed. Bad habits could be shed. Ignorance could fall away. And from that decay, something wiser, purer, more divine could grow. They even had a phrase for it: the greening of the soul. And guess who shows up in their illustrations? Faces in leaves, bodies twined with vines, mysterious leafy figures symbolizing growth, transformation, renewal. They weren't just decorative, they were symbols of internal rebirth. One of the most striking is the green lion, a fierce creature shown devouring the sun. It represents nature's raw, primal power, the force that breaks things down so something new can begin. It's not the Green Man exactly, but in many versions, the similarities are there. A wild mane, a consuming hunger, a ferocity that feels both terrifying and necessary. In alchemical philosophy, there's also something called the philosopher's garden. This isn't a real place. It's symbolic, a metaphor for the soul. A garden inside each of us, filled with beliefs, thoughts, intentions. Left untended, weeds grow. But if you care for it through self-reflection, discipline, spiritual work, it flourishes. And suddenly, the Green Man doesn't just look like a nature spirit, he looks like you, or at least the version of you waiting to be cultivated. He's the inner self, twined with growth and decay, watching from the shadows as you decide whether to wither or bloom. But even blooming doesn't last forever. And maybe that's the final layer of this mystery. Because leaves don't just sprout, they fall. Vines dry up. Green turns brown. The cycle always ends in death before it begins again. And so, carved in stone, silent and still, the Green Man might also be a memento mori, a reminder of death, a whisper that says, all flesh returns to the earth.
His vines creep from mouths, not because he's alive, but because he's decaying. And in that decay, life is reborn. Think about where he's placed. Above pews, watching from darkened corners of cathedrals, in places meant for reflection, confession, rebirth of the soul. He stares, not just outward, but inward. So, what is he really? A forgotten god? A hidden pagan symbol smuggled into holy space? A secret message from a medieval mason? A protective spirit? An archetype from across the globe? A mirror of your own transformation? Or maybe he's all of those things, or none. Because the Green Man never speaks. He only watches. You bring the meaning. You decide what you see. Maybe that's the real power of folklore. Not that it answers questions, but that it asks the right ones. So the next time you step into an old church, look up. You might find him there, watching, waiting. A leafy face carved in silence, asking you not what you believe, but what you've forgotten. What wildness lives in you? What wisdom hides in the overgrowth? What part of you needs to die so something new can grow? Let me know what you see in that leafy face down in the comments. And if you enjoyed this strange walk through forgotten folklore, don't miss our next video, a chilling look into the meaning behind the magpie rhyme. 1 for sorrow, 2 for joy. A warning wrapped in a nursery verse with something much darker hidden beneath. See you in the next one, Darklings.